Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar about the new machinery regulation, which has the number 2023-1230. My name is Wolfgang Onderker and I will present this webinar together with my colleague Leonardo Sanchez. To my person, I'm a safety consultant at Wieland Electric in Germany. I joined Wieland around February this year and be proud to be one member of this fantastic safety team here at Wieland. Leonardo Sanchez, you may all know, he's a well-known safety development manager at Wieland Electric Incorporated in Canada and one of the biggest experts in the safety community. Before we start our webinar, we have to do some organizational topics. How are questions handled? We would like to answer all the questions in the chat. Sometimes we will interrupt our speaker and ask the question directly. If there are too many questions, we would like to answer them after the webinar via email, or we'll give you a short call depending on the question. If you have any kind of questions afterwards, you can contact us at the email address safety.consulting@wieland-electric.com. After the webinar, you will get the chance to give us feedback, including the possibility to contact directly us after the webinar. We would like to have this feedback for us, so please take this 1 or 2 minutes, just fill in the form, and all feedback is good feedback for us so that we know where we can improve or what you really liked at this webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and if you stay now in this webinar, you give us your consent to record it. So, which topics do we have now? At first, we will give you some general information on new directives and regulations. And second, we will give you the view of the machine regulation, which is officially published by today in the EC journal. I would like now to hand over to my colleague Leonardo, and I hope you all will enjoy our webinar.
Okay. Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to this webinar. And let's talk about the directive and regulations, the new regulations about machinery safety. So for everybody, this is a breaking news. Today, the standard was published, the machinery regulation. As my colleague says, the number is 1230. This is the new number for the machinery regulation. Basically, we will have more detailed consideration of the changes in this document. And the document was published, as we said today, on the official journal on June 29th. So this is the reason why we did this seminar today, because we want to give this information to you. This is just published. So now we got the regulation in place, but we are going to talk about the deadlines and so on. So there are additional acts related to machinery safety. The Cyber Resilience Act is one of those documents that we need to take care or take in consideration when you are dealing with machinery. Either you can be a machine builder or you can be an end user of the machines. So basically, you need to take in consideration this information. And this includes product requirements, depending on criticality, obviously, hard disk versus firewall. Also, you will find availability of implementation related to the updates. And this act is actually a work in progress because now it is on the draft stage. We also got the AI regulation. It has a lot of topics, but maybe one of the most important is the prevention of subliminal influence through AI. And again, this is also a work in progress because it is on the design stage. And we got the GPSR, General Product Safety Regulation. Obviously, the existing one will be replaced by this document. And it was published on the official journal on May the 23rd. So this is also a document that you can get from the official journal. Now, let's review some differences between directive and regulation. So the machinery world is moving away from directives towards the regulations, and this is basically because different situations. But let's define what is a directive and what is a regulation. So a directive is a legislative act that defines a goal that all countries from the European community must achieve. However, it is up to the individual countries to devise their own laws and how to reach these goals. If we move, on the other hand, we got the regulation. So the regulations are legal acts. So until now, it's basically the same as the directive, but it is defined by the European agreement. They have a general applications, are mandatory, and are directly applicable without any modification in all European Union member states. So this is basically the difference. So that's the reason why we are moving from the directive to the regulation. So the regulations do not have to be transposed into national laws, as I already mentioned. Obviously, they are quicker in effect, faster. However, they are individual applications and key dates for the regulations. And the objective is to have more control over the implementation of this legislation. In parallel, there is a tendency towards horizontal legal acts. As you know, horizontal means that applies for, in general, for a lot of stuff. For example, the CRI, the Cyber Security Regulation Act. And then let's review the current development of the machinery regulation. What's going on now? So in April 18, the Parliament voted successfully about the machinery regulation. Then on June 29, there was a publication on the official journal. So it was today for everybody. It was just today. So we were expecting, because the committee, they said, the Parliament, they said, we are going to publish the standard on June. They wait almost until the last day to publish the standard, but it happens just this morning, guys. So this is the most recent information about the machinery regulation. On July the 14th, there will be a report from the Commission, and then the Annex 1 is going to be reviewed. Remember, the annexes has changed. My colleague is going to talk a little more about this. But in the Annex 1, you used to see the EHSR. Now you will find the special categories of machinery. So this is going to be reviewed. And then now we can talk with fixed dates. On January the 14th, on 2027, it means 40 months later after the publication, the machinery regulation will take place. It's fully in effect. So this is the deadline for the machinery regulation according to the publication that they made today on this standard. So there is something missing here, but let's wait for my colleague Wolfgang, which will go deeper on these new requirements. So where we take this information from, you can access to the published text. You will find this text in the official journal. This is the number 1230, and all the information that we are sharing with you and that we are going to share with you is based on this document. So why we need a new machinery regulation? There are some issues, let's say that way, some issues with the current machinery directive. I said current because it's going to be valid until 2026, obviously, or January 13, 2027, when the new machinery regulation will take place. So some of the problem is that the current machinery directive cannot manage the state-of-the-art technologies. For example, self-learning machines, that means artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, it means networking and industry 4.0, which is very common in Europe and now in Americas region as well. Also robots and collaborative applications. So there is no a good requirement from the machinery directive for these technologies. On the other hand, on the machinery regulation, you will have a lot of requirements regarding these situations. In addition, the machinery directive is not designed according to the NLF. It means the new legislative framework. And there are other directives like the low voltage directive that has been designed according to this framework. So it makes a little complicated to make cross-reference or to work with those documents together. Now, the machinery regulation is designed based on this new framework. In addition, the machinery directive has no relevant information or consideration about the substantial modifications to the machinery once the machinery is on the end user facility and they need to make a modification because XYZ reason. So you won't find good information about this. On the other hand, on the machinery regulation, you will find specific requirements for substantial modification. That's the reason why you will see different type of safety solutions implemented on different machines when they come from different countries from the European community, because there are no good information about the substantial modification. In addition, there is no proper information about operating instructions. So now it is mandatory to have this information available. And obviously, the lack of clarity leads to the lack of legal compliance. This for manufacturers and also for end users. Well, I now handle to my colleague.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. So we have now the new machinery regulation in place. What are new contents on this? We have the term now related products. However, the regulation often only refers to machines, which strictly speaking does not apply to related products. Then there will be a new point F. When can we use the term machine? A machine is also a machine when it is missing only the uploading of the software. That means if you have any type of machine where you have to upload a software so that, for example, a robot arm can now do his task, then already it is a machine when you deliver it. Just because there is the missing software and you do it on site, this doesn't mean that this is not yet a complete machine. It does mean it is already a machine. Safety components. Now also the software is a safety component. In the Machinery Directive, the software isn't listed as a safety component. Within the new regulation, also our software now is a safety component. This means you also have to fulfill standards on how the way it was, how you developed your software, how you tested your software, and this must be also documented as well. AI systems for the execution of safety function. At the moment, currently, it's practically irrelevant in classical machinery building, but we will have this regulation now for many years, hopefully. And so they're already prepared that there will be a time that AI systems maybe are capable of executing safety functions. The partly completed machinery, the term has changed from almost a machine to not yet a machine. This is just some wording, but you shouldn't be aware of this, that the old almost a machine will change now to not yet a machine. When does the machinery regulation take place, on which application? Normally, okay, everything what is a machine will be handled by the machinery regulation, but there are some exceptions. Which has been removed de facto is nuclear technology, except it is listed in the new annex, or when it's compromised by the information in the new Annex 3. Then lifting equipment and interchangeable equipment on ships are no longer accepted. Now they are amended. What still is not excluded is e-bikes, electrical powered furniture, and 3D printer. A normal printer in your office still will not be in the machinery regulation, but a 3D printer will be. Now, which is new exempted, is a cleaning robot. Why is this? At the moment in the Machinery Directive, everything which is also covered by the Low Voltage Directive isn't covered by the Machinery Directive. But a cleaning robot will actually is under the terms of a Machinery Directive. So they added the RED, the Radio Equipment Directive, when it is also covered any type of machine by the Radio Equipment Directive. It doesn't need to be listed now under the machinery regulation any longer. So that means like a cleaning robot will not be any longer part of the machinery directive, machinery regulation. In the directive it is, in the regulation it isn't. A problem we do have with our electric motors, because then it depends on which voltage does my motor have. Is it below 50 volt DC or 75 volt AC? The machinery regulation will be taking place. Is it up to 1000 volt DC or 1500 volt AC? The low voltage directive will take effect on these kind of motors. Above these voltages, the machinery regulation is again the one which will take place for it. And it will be completely different again if you have an ATEX or a radio controlled motor. So that means when you do your risk assessments or you do some verification, you also have to be very take much attention to what is the voltage of the motor, so that you know which kind of regulation or directive do you have to fulfill. In the economic operators, we have also some changes, which is still the same, is that the manufacturer for own use is completely covered the same way as in the Machinery Directive. This means if you have a customer who's just producing parts or machines for self-use, then there will be no changes for these people. But there is a gap. What happens with the self-use of self-important products, because this is not really covered so far. We hope for a lot of things that there will be some kind of guidelines or interpretation papers how to understand this new machinery regulations, because also it covers now a lot of more things. We still see a lot of gaps inside there. Then we have maybe defined a possible error, and this is about covering used products. In the Article 3 of this new regulation, paragraph 21, we have the definition of a distributor who makes things available on the market. But it isn't clear if also it is covering a used product or not. So we will see if they will make some additional changes now for this, or how to interpret this Article 3, paragraph 21. Yeah, the assumption of error follows from Directive 10. This is just our point of view. This can be also maybe have a different point of view from other people. Which is new is that you have to have a complaint register and you have to keep it, and you need to collect these complaints for at least 10 years. No change in the retention period for the documentation. This is also 10 years, but observe restrictions on digitalization. We will see in the following slides. Spare parts, big topic. Spare parts which have been certified on the old directive can still be supplied. You don't need to do a recertification just because the new machinery regulation has taken place then in 27. If you have still a valid certification for a spare part which has been certified under the old directive, this is still valid then. Your supply chain has to be documented. This means from whom to whom I am selling some machine. A new role we have, it's the importer. He must check the manufacturer on many points or take many responsibilities from it. He may not place a machine on the market if there is a doubt about the conformity. He must provide own contact details. He assumes the obligation to keep the register of complaints. He is responsible for storage and transport. And if required, he also has the duty to recall a machine or a product. And then the second new role we have at the economic operators is the distributor. The distributor has limited obligations to check documentation or execution, but he has also needs to stop distributing any kind of product if he has doubts about the conformity. He's also responsible for the storage and transport. This means if there occurs a problem or a dangerous situation because of wrong storage or transport, he is responsible for that. Then the producer obligations for importers and distributors if placing on the market under own name or trademark, or if performing changes with impact to conformity. Just a quick overview, the annexes, the numbering has changed. We lose now the CE marking annex. This is now in the regulation, or it was always in the regulation 765 from 2008. So it is not any longer now part of our machinery regulation, but you still need to do CE marking on your machine and you still have to do CE process. The notified bodies are now listed in Article 30 of our machinery regulation. And we have two new annexes, which is one time the type examination plus internal production control, and the individual examination, which is Annex 10, which will have, if you use you build a single machine for a customer, which will not be going into a serial production, then you use this individual examination for this certification. Then for this annex, this is now divided into two parts. Remember, it was before Annex 4, now it is Annex 1. Part A, there are listed 6 types of machines, which has the mandatory examination done by the notified body, and this is independent of the applied standards. This means we have one time the removable mechanical transmission devices, including their guards. Then we have the guards for removable mechanical transmission devices. We have the vehicle servicing lifts. We have a portable cartridge operating, fixing, or other impact machinery. The safety components with self-involving behavior that ensures safety functions. This is again for the artificial intelligence, and machines with embedded systems with self-evolving behavior that ensure safety functions. Also, again, the topic AI. Why is this now listed? At the moment, AI doesn't have much priority or much a tendency for us as a machine builder, but this regulation should cover now for many years the risks for machineries, and so they already implemented or included these types of machines. Then we have the part B. This part B is the manufacturing and self-declaration according to harmonized standards where it is possible. At the moment, there are 19 types of machines listed. On the link we shown in the further slide, you can check these annex, and then you can see also all these type of machines which are listed over there. And this annex is some kind of a living annex because future adjustments of these lists are possible. Initially, after 36 months from now on, each member state can send a report to the council and asked to add some machines into these high-risk machinery annex. So this means 36 months from now, there can be now additionally listed machines, and 6 months later, you have the new regulation taking place, and you have to fulfill the new regulation. And if you're building a machine and you start it, and now half a year before the new regulation shows up, the Annex 1 will change, and now the machine you are building will become part of the high-risk machinery, and maybe then you have the mandatory examination by a notified body necessary. So this is also something you have to keep in mind. Always have a look on this Annex 1 because it can change. After these 36 months, every 5 years, we will have an update on the Annex 1. Again, the member states will send every 5 years reports to the council, and the council will then maybe add some new machines which will have the mandatory examination, or maybe also then they decide to change a machine from part A to part B also. Then we have changes in the new Annex 3, which is at the moment the Annex 1 at the Machinery Directive. Some problem we have seen is that they mix up inside this annex the wording of risk and hazards. So sometimes they're talking about risks, but they are meaning hazards, and vice versa. So when you read this annex, please always turn on your hat and be careful when you read something. Do they really mean now risk, or do they mean or actually hazard? So maybe this will be corrected, we will see, because we think it would be part of bug fixing, but we will see how they handle this issue. One big point on this is now the ergonomics, the human-machine interface. So it will have an impact on the anthropometric data, so the body measurements data. The standard human has changed, the standard user has changed. At the moment, it is currently mainly related to the male gender, and this cannot be any longer the right way. And this will also then have, when they change these body measurements, subsequently impact on the standards such as the ISO 13854, 13855, 13857. So this means also the standard distance from our light grids and light curtains maybe have to change. Sometimes the if you want the overreach protection, you have to maybe to calculate this new, and this has something to be in your mind. Okay, this body measurement data will change, and we will have also some impact on the other standards which are related to safety distances. Why are they doing this? The background is you have more and more machines in the public where the normal people, not only people in the industry, get contact into. Like in Germany, you have a deposit on bottles, and then you go and bring it to a machine, and you have to place it in a hole, and this hole has a special height, and this also has to be now adapted and to be rearranged so that this hole is in a ergonomic height. Then we have the protection against corruption, also intentional change in the way of looking at things. This means now we really have to look and work like an attacker. We cannot go any longer and think, okay, I've done everything what I've done in my mind. Everything is good, everything is safe so far. You really have to look on your machine. Is there any kind of people, or is there a way to get access to my machine when you use some criminal intention with this? And if you find such a gap, you have to close it. It isn't any longer that you can say, okay, if somebody wants to manipulate my machine, he will always find a way. You have now to find all possibilities and all manipulations way, even if they would be done with some criminal mind intentions. And it's not only to prevent access, but you also have to collect evidences. That means you have to have now a log file. When does somebody had access to my CPU, to my program, to my machine? And not only online access, also offline. And if you read this paragraph, you will find this does mean also that you have to apply access. You have to log the access when somebody had access to your control cabinet or to your hardware relay, because it's not saying that only access to any kind of software has to be tagged. It also has to be logged that any kind of access to your safety equipment or to your machine has to be taken as an or to collect as an evidence. The retention period for this is for 5 years, so you have to keep this log file for at least 5 years. Then you have some unintentional external influences, also reasonably foreseeable malicious attempts by third parties. That means if somebody tries to hack you, again, this Cyber Resilience Act, it will be hopefully one of the tools to prevent such access via third parties, but you have now to implement some kind of cybersecurity into your machine. Another big change is that a communication failure will no longer lead to a stop. You are also now allowed to keep your machine running even though you have a communication failure or a loss of communication to your control system or to a other machine, but only if this failure not leads to a dangerous situation. Another point is that you now have to have a maintenance access requirement. This means for the access for the maintenance personnel, if something happens during maintenance, you have to give now the information how to rescue these persons out of this emergency. So you have to tell them what kind of dangerous fluids are inside the machine, how can they get contact to it during maintenance, and is there any other dangerous situation, and if this happens, how can somebody be rescued out of this situation?
So what's the impact on the new regulation over the harmonized standards? So guess what? How many standards are harmonized under the Machinery Directive? So 100, 200, 300, what do you think? Look at the answer. It is 780 standards. There are a lot of standards, and here we got a big challenge. And the reason why is, okay, and the reason why is because due to the new EHSR, all harmonized standards lose their presumption of conformity. Obviously, when the new regulation start his application, it will be on January the 14th. So these standards have to be harmonized again, but this time under the machinery regulation. And obviously, the standard needs to be published again on the official journal. What is the problem? The situation is that currently there are more or less 120 standards waiting to be harmonized. But in addition to this, the pyramid or triangle, whatever it is for you, of standards also have some issues. As you know, the C standards can be adapted only when the type A and the type B standards have been revised and obviously published on the official journal. But remember that for ISO, it takes at least 18 months for every type of standards. So if we add the type A, then the type B, and finish with the type C standard, so this means 54 months to have the type C standards published on the official journal. And the machinery regulation will take place in 42 months. So there is a gap between the machinery regulation and the type C standards to be published on the official journal. Of course, there are some legal documents that can cover this gap, but we hope that this process is smoother and we have this information as soon as possible. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as Leo said, there will be some, or there is the possibility for the European Council to make a legal act. This legal act has the same priority and the same value like a harmonized standard then. And we hope that the European Council will give us a lot of legal acts before the new regulation starts, so that when the machinery regulation takes place on 14th of January 2027, that we then have already some legal acts where we can do our own CE marking and our CE process and our certification with these legal acts. The new Annex 4, which has the documentation inside, in principle, we have now the possibility to give digital documents. We can give this, for example, on a USB stick with PDFs. And important is always you have to specify how to access the necessary documentation, and still the user can request a paper form. That means if he buys a machine, he still is allowed to say, okay, I buy it and I want to have all the documentation in paper. I know it's just maybe a minor thing to you, but to be more green and to be more economic, the regulation tries now to save the resources for paper. And as you know, a machine manual can have around 1,000 pages. So these pages will just go into a big file. This file goes into the edge of any kind of bin, and then nobody will see it again in the whole lifetime, because mostly the people are looking on their laptops and checking the manuals over there, because there you have the search functionality. Safety relevant source code is now part of the documentation, but not at the end user documentation, but as part now of the documentation of your machine. That means if something happens, it is necessary for you to submit this to the authority. And if this is necessary, you can explicitly communicate to the authority that the code is considered as a trade secret. So still, if you have to give somebody an insight on your code, it is still ensured that nobody else than the authority is allowed to have a look on this code. Which has been removed now is the need for identification of original or translation. You don't need to tag this any longer. And declaration of conformity is no longer part of the technical documentation. This means we don't need any longer a documentation representative. So this role is now deleted from the regulation. The declaration of conformity is not any longer part of this technical documentation. What is new? The description on how to test the safety functions. But this doesn't just mean that you tell the customers, okay, to test a e-stop, you have to push it and then you have to check whether everything stops. If he needs to have a special tool or some special devices for testing safety functionality, then you have to provide this to the customer also. So that means if he needs a special tool to have a testing of a light curtain, or a special device for testing the light curtain, or a laser scanner area, then you have to provide this to the customer also. Then another thing is you have to give a description on how people can be rescued. I told you before on the new Annex 3 about the EHSR, you have to inform how to get people from maintenance or during the work out of dangerous situations. How can they be rescued? This has to be written down now in the documentation. The language of the documentation is again something, the wording that this has to be in understandable language. This is now one of the only things which can be defined individually by each member state. Each member state can now say, okay, English is an understandable language in our country, and we allow everyone to bring us or give us manuals just in English. In Germany, it will be, unfortunately, again, only German accepted. But other countries can now say, okay, we want only English, or we want to have it in French, or whatever language they would like to have. The retention period is again defined differently. In principle, 10 years as a minimum is still the minimum time, this 10 years. But at the request of the authority, however, it will be during the entire lifetime of the machine. That means you have to keep any kind of documentation during the entire lifetime. If the lifetime is less than 10 years, you still have to keep it for 10 years. If the lifetime of your machine is above 10 years, then you have to keep it more than 10 years. In case of online provision, also during the entire lifetime, and by partly completed machinery, there we have 10 years, which is deviating from the complete machines. If you use digital documents, we have an end condition. If you provide it digital, then it's mandatory to make available online as well. Then simply providing PDFs would not be sufficient, and applies even if the client does not need it. So it doesn't matter if your client says, I don't need it online, I will have it somewhere else. Doesn't matter. If you say, I have digital documents, you have also make it mandatory available online. It is not sufficient to say, okay, my machine has an HMI and there will be a button for manual and they will push on this and then they can see the manual. Because if the machine is not under power, the HMI is not under power, nobody can read the manual. That's the reason why you have to give the customer also the chance to see the manual online as well. So what is now the situation? You've seen this screen or this timeline at the beginning where Leo presented it. We have had the vote on 18th of April 23. Now today we had the publication in the official journal. That means practically this regulation is immediately in effect 20 days after publication, unlike a directive. We have the key date provision, may not yet be applied. On 14th of July 26, we will have the first report of the Commission on data submitted by the member states. Remember, you can send within 36 months, we will have the first adaptation of Annex 1. This will be incorporated by the reports to the Commission of the data which has been submitted by the member states. And the Annex 1 then is reviewed, the special categories of machinery. And now the key date we have here is the 14th of January 2027. With the 14th of January 27, the regulation is fully in effect. Some parts of this regulation takes earlier effect. This is mainly things like the notified bodies will be then incorporated. The things like the Annex 1 reports have been then incorporated, but the complete full regulation will take effect on the 14th of January 2027. And the Machinery Directive has then repealed. That means if you want to certify your machine on the 13th of January 2027, then you have to fulfill the Machinery Directive. If you are on the next day, you have to fulfill completely the regulation. So the new machinery and equipment placed on the EU market must comply with the regulation. On the 14th July of 2028, first report on the evaluation and review of the regulation. That means you see it's 18 months later, there will be a first report for a review and evaluation of this regulation. So please keep this 14th of January 2027. It must be inside your heads. Start early enough with working on your procedures, with adapting your work style that you have to fulfill on this date, 14th of January 2027. You have to fulfill the new regulation, and there will be no transition period in which both will be where both can be applied. No, from day to up to 13th of January 2027, the Machinery Directive has to be applied, and on the next day, on the 14th, you have to apply the regulation. So what effects do we have then in the practice? Okay, the directive becomes a regulation. Everything which is noted over there in the regulation or stated over there must be directly transferred into each member state. There is an adjustment of scope and definition where you have to keep in mind that you maybe have to adapt your documentation. The provision of the documentation in digital form is then allowed, but still remember, you still have to give a paper version of your manual or documentation as soon as your customer wants to have it. The new provisions for specific machinery categories, the changes for safety components, like that now the safety software is part of a safety component. We have the adaptation of health and safety requirements, especially for the new technologies, and the additions and reordering of the appendices. So with this, I would hand over now again to my colleague Leo.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, so we are almost finished. So now you know that something happened. Okay, here we go. Now you know that the regulations is a live document subject to updates, so please keep informed about that information. And if you follow us in social media, you will be updated. Obviously, we are going to have more webinars on this new regulation because there is a lot of material to share with you. So what can you do now? You can check your actual CE process. Also, you need to customize your risk assessment methodologies, templates, not only for the general hazard that you will find on the machine. Now you need to include cybersecurity and AI as well. Again, you need providing digital documentation. But remember, we need to understand how to buy machines, and this is more for the end users because in some cases they do not receive the information as they expected, and this is basically because we need to include those requests or requirements in the RFQ or RFP document. Request for proposal, request for quotation, and Wieland can support you in that process. You need also to adapt the plates, email address, etc., everything, and everything that is not in contradiction with the current Machinery Directive can already be implemented. But again, remember that today the Machinery Directive is valid until January 14, 2027. In addition, remember that you need to check your CE process for compliance with the machinery ordinance. So if you are developing machines, please take in consideration all the new requirements because if your machine is going to be delivered after the deadline, it means January the 14th. So you need to be in compliance with the machinery regulation, because in some cases the machine takes 1 or 2 years, I don't know, but please be careful with that situation. So what else can you do about this? Obviously, you can rely on Wieland Electric for these machinery updates, machinery changes related to the new regulation. So in addition, we have for you webinars and trainings. This webinar is obviously for free, and we are going to be providing more webinars related to this situation. Remember, this is the first webinar in the entire world that is giving the breaking news about the publish of the machinery regulation. Sorry for the boycott that we have, but you need to understand that those topics are very sensible. Then we got full day trainings on different topics. For example, if you want to be trained on a specific standard, like let's say lag out, tag out, or risk assessment standards, or the design standards, we can provide that training as well. Sistema obviously as well, and we got multi-day training with certification. We are the course providers, and TUB will provide the certification. We got the CESC and the CSC. Those are basically for the electrical, electronical, and electronical programmable devices. And the CSC is also for the fluid power safety solutions. So this is kind of a unique certification because it's a certification based on the fluid power safety solutions, safety related. Then obviously we got our safety services. We can provide assessment or conformity audits on your machines or your plants in order to understand the maturity of the safety level of your different machines, and then we can come with a plan in order to provide risk assessment to the higher risk machines. Remember, this is removed from the regulation, but it's still in the directive. Then we got the consultation services, obviously taking consideration the CE process. We got also workshops if you want to understand the standard, but also how to apply the standard. So we can provide those type of exercises and workshops. Also, we got inspection of machinery, the typical services related to the machine safety life cycle. And also we got the stop time measurement for our AOPD, including overrun measurements. So we got the devices certified for this type of services. And you can also hit our link here and you can access to our suite of safety services. Well, I know we have some questions. This is our global safety email. So if you got a request, if you got some information, you need some information, you can click on this link, or you can copy and paste and send us your request, and we will be more than happy to support you in any safety requirement that you have. Even if you are a machine builder, if you are an OEM end user.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time and for your interest in this topic. And yeah, like Leo said, please fill in the survey in end of this webinar, and I hope we will see you next time on our next webinar when we hopefully have not so much issues with my audio. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you all again.